all juniors have a directed study. They have a study hall built into their schedule. So that time is primarily used, well, we like it primarily to be used for the college process or post-secondary process, whatever the plan is. So students have built-in time during the day. This is in addition to Flex, to meet with their counselor. In addition to that, senior year, next fall will be very similar to this spring, in that students will have a directed study that will be available to them. And the idea is we really want to try to make sure students have the time built in besides just at home. Obviously, we want them to have access to their counselor, and we think that time is very, very important. Are we all set with BCAT? Sorry. We're good. We're not doing this separate setup? Okay, great. All right then, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Miss Minty.
All right, hi everybody. So the first thing, this is just important to note as well, people are at all different points in the process, but in terms of starting to explore and make a plan, it's important to think about this if you haven't already. Maybe what types of careers you're potentially interested in, what your strengths and weaknesses are that would go well with certain careers, whether you do or don't want to go to college and whether it's necessary for the career that you're interested in, and potentially also what majors you may or may not be interested in. Because all those things, knowing that about yourself, then guides narrowing down what type of next steps to look into. All right, so this is adding on to what Mr. Adebato just shared too about having that extra study hall right now for juniors. The intention is not to have that be a period where it's always spent on homework. It's actually so that they can meet with us. So we build in, like he said, at least 3 group meetings during their study hall where we do break down the process. However, if they don't attend that group meeting during the study hall, they're missing a lot of information and may not be on track in the same way that we hope they would be. It's important to check our Google Classrooms at this point. You know, in previous years we weren't posting much, but now at this point in junior year and next year especially, it is important to check it once a week to just stay on top of important information. Also important to be checking the school email if that's not already part of the routine. And I think someone else is going to talk about this program we use called SCORE. That's how that funny word at the top is pronounced, is SCORE. And that's for the college application and search process. It's, in addition to those group meetings, we also really encourage at least one individual meeting with us that the student should book between now and the end of the year. But then they're welcome to make more than just one of those meetings too. And again, that's why they have all those study halls. In addition to meeting with us, though, it's also important that they build in time on their own to explore the different suggestions that we will work on during the groups or during the one-on-one meetings. So we may help them build a list of places to look into, but they need to invest that time to actually go to those websites and see which are the places that they want to explore further or not. Okay, speaking of SCORE, I guess I'm the one who's going to say more about SCORE. So there are, in addition to the college search feature of it, there are career resources on there as well. So there are a couple quizzes they can take to see what careers maybe are good matches based on their personality or the types of activities they do or don't enjoy. They can also look up any career, you know, besides what comes up on results and get all kinds of information from income to also what are the subjects that are key subject areas for that career, or what level of education does it require. Next year, as when we're sending their transcript and recommendation letters as part of the college application, SCORE is the program that we use to do that. And then it's the main place we're encouraging right now that they're searching and exploring the colleges. And again, during the groups, we help them connect to that program. And I'm going to show you in another slide or two, too. One of the best things about SCORE is it's actually your best place to get a real sense of what are the odds of admission to particular colleges. because there are graphs on there that show, instead of just the average GPA for a particular school, they show our students and what GPAs they had, whether they did or didn't get into schools. So the average GPA of acceptance for a student here may be very different than at another town in Massachusetts, or especially different than other states in the country as well. Someone had, yeah?
Is the standard based on only on GPA or?
Based on, I'm sorry, what GPA?
Is a graph that is that comes with score?
Oh, it's weighted, yes. And actually, we're going to show you a couple samples of it in a moment, so it'll make more sense. But yes, Burlington only has a weighted GPA. Yep.
School come in a web version as well as an app version?
Yes. Yep. Actually, I only use the web version. So I guess, yeah, lots of students use the app, maybe because they're using it on their iPad. But yes, and actually one of the sheets, if you'd like access as well, you can sign up for your own account where you see all the same things that the students see. But yes, you can absolutely just go straight out of a website and a laptop or a computer. It doesn't have to be on an iPad or a phone. Yes. All right, so I promise we'll show the scattergrams in just a couple slides, but another thing to be thinking about besides odds of admission are these other factors. So there are thousands of colleges. It's not humanly possible to thoroughly research every one of them. So it's helpful to think about what some of your preferences may be in these areas to help narrow that list of thousands down to a more reasonable number of places to look into. So especially being able to compare places, you know, do you have a preference for being at a campus that's in a city or a campus that's in a more, you know, less busy area? Or do you prefer to be at a school with a couple thousand students or a school with over 10,000? Those are usually the ranges, and they are extremely different experiences. And then there are many other factors that you see up on the screen here, and others that you don't see that may be important to people as well. Like, particularly if you're going to live on campus, I think getting a sense of what are the type of people that are there, and are they the people that you want to spend 4 years with? What is the food like? What are the dorms like? These things do actually matter, even though, of course, the academic experience matters as well. Okay. And then speaking of just other ways to search colleges, SCORE is the main one, but there is also a traditional college fair happening this year. It's coming up in about a month, and it's going to be at Reading High School. So Burlington doesn't have a college fair at our high school, but instead we partner with other schools in the area. So we co-sponsor it, and there will be many, many college admissions reps at that fair, so you can go around and pick up information and check in with representatives from a lot of colleges in one space.
We'll have a list of colleges attending as we get closer.
Okay, yep, so we are going to send out closer to the event when it's more settled exactly which colleges are coming. That will be advertised for you also. There are other ways besides SCORE that you're welcome to also explore that you see on the screen here too, but SCORE will be the important one in the end, that heading into next year, the colleges you're applying to do need to be on that list so that we're able to send those documents for you. Okay. And then, so a good starting point is looking on the websites and maybe picking up information at the fair. But then some of those other factors I mentioned, like just what are the type of other students who go there, and are they your kind of people? You know, how does it just feel like a place that you're comfortable, or doesn't feel like a place that you're comfortable? The best way to figure that out is by actually visiting a college in person, if possible. So particularly places that are local. On every website there's information, I'll get to you in just a moment, about when their tours are offered and how to sign up for them. And by visiting a place in person, it also, they put you on a list. It's a positive thing that just demonstrates that you're interested in that school. If it's further away though, and it's not possible to visit in person, most every college now also on their website will have virtual tours and virtual information sessions. Yes, did you have a question about this?
How important is it to visit school? Does it have any bearing on like you get accepted?
Yeah, so how important it is, I think it can be important for different reasons, but I imagine you're asking in terms of the odds of admission?
Yes.
Yes. So it really depends on the place, but actually I had a student just recently who told me that a college she applied to in Connecticut that should have been a place that we would have expected her to be accepted, she was not accept. She wasn't denied, but she wasn't accepted either. And the letter she received said, if you'd like to, continue to be considered, please come visit the campus. So I do think there are some colleges, particularly the smaller ones as opposed to the really large ones. But when someone doesn't visit and it is pretty close by, they might wonder, are you actually really interested in this school, or did you just apply at the last minute? Places that are far away, they're not going to make that assumption. But I actually think the more important reason to visit is more so the other things I talked about. Just, in my own experience of visiting campuses, it upset my parents, but I remember there was a school in Virginia that, in the view book, I thought it was going to be one of my favorite schools. But when we drove down there, approaching the campus, I just knew this is not a place I would want to go. And I didn't even, said it's not even worth going on the tour because I can just tell I don't want to go here. Had I just applied and not visited, I would not have known that. So I think that's even the more important reason to visit when you can. But of course, when it's far away, you may not be able to visit every place before you apply, but I think if possible, at least visiting before you choose to attend is a really good idea. Okay, and then this is, I think, the slide right before those examples of the scattergrams, but just to make sure everyone's familiar with some of these terms that we talk about, to say what are places that are more or less difficult to get into. When we're referring to a college as a reach, that is a college where the odds are against getting into that college. And it can be for one of two reasons. It can be because your GPA is significantly less than the average student who's accepted for that school, but it can also be just for those ultra-selective schools where they get so many applications but can only take a fraction of all the people who apply. So either types of those are places where when you apply, the assumption is unfortunately the odds are against getting in, but it may be a place you might still want to apply to one or two in that category if that is a school that would be your dream school. Realistic is probably where most people focus, and so that is where it's not a guarantee, but it's not a long shot either, and it's generally that's a school that does accept a large percentage of people that are in your GPA range. And then a safety is the opposite of a reach. It's where we're really expecting you will be accepted. So no four-year colleges are ever a 100% guarantee, unfortunately. So I recommend to my students to at least apply to two safeties. But most of the time, we expect you're going to get into your safeties. In a worst case scenario too, if those are the only ones you get into, you want to make sure that your safeties aren't afterthoughts. Your safeties should be ones that you love. And a positive thing about safeties as well is those are the places, because your GPA is above average, that may offer you additional money too to try to encourage you to come. So it's okay to apply to more safeties, or to have your first choice be a safety is not a bad thing. And then speaking of that financial part, it's also important to have an understanding about, based on your income and based on how the colleges you're applying to operate, what is the estimated cost going to be at the places you're applying, and make sure that they are places that if they accept you, you are going to be able to afford to go there. Otherwise, spending money on the application really doesn't make sense. Okay, so here's the examples of the scattergrams. All the dots you see of different colors in the middle of the graph are actual Burlington students that have applied to New York University over the last several years. And this is an example of a reach school. So the only people who are accepted are the green dots. So there's really, I think it's 3 or 4 that I see there. as you can see, they're all have high GPAs. They're all 4.0 or higher. But it's also not clearly just someone who has a higher GPA gets in and someone doesn't. There's plenty of people in the 4.5 range who did not get in, and yet there's a person with a 3.9 or 4.0 who did get in. So in that reach, this is one of those types I mentioned of being a reach just because they accept a small fraction of all the qualified applicants who apply. But the red triangles are people who were denied. The blue and yellow are just in the murky in between, where they're not denied, they're put on a wait list, or they're deferred, so they didn't quite get in either. I would recommend, by the way, I've been trying to tell my students right now to ignore the SAT and ACT data on here, because for the last several years, all the schools have been test optional, and most students have not shared their test scores. So the test scores are represented on our graphs because SCORE knows what our students' test scores were, but for the most part, the colleges didn't know what the students' test scores were. So I really would just focus on the GPA part of these graphs at this point in time. Okay, and then this is another more of a, depending on the student, a safer, realistic school in contrast. So Framingham State, you see that a majority of students on this graph are green and were accepted. And there's a range all the way from the 2.1-ish to the over 4.0 who all have been accepted. And then there's a few people, and you're probably thinking, why was that person with the highest GPA didn't get in, and others did? At these state universities, occasionally it can be based on if they're applying for an extremely competitive major, like nursing in particular, just tend to have really limited spots at schools. So that would be my assumption, is it was a major like that. But otherwise, you can see that generally, for most people with decent grades, Framingham looks like a fairly safe graph. In contrast. Okay, and then speaking of the more competitive schools, so places like New York University and others, things that they'll be looking for besides just overall GPA is they do like to see that the student has taken at least some more challenging courses. So here we put, for example, AP or dual enrollment courses. Honors is fine too. You know, the issue is just they would expect someone to have not only taken CP courses all throughout high school. They also tend to expect that by senior year they have made it to at least pre-calculus for math. And instead, this is something I've noticed over the years, a trend growing, that sometimes people will drop classes like their electives or their world language and instead double up in science or math classes. But these most competitive colleges, really, the best, strongest transcript you can have is to stick with all 5 core subjects every year and have less of those extras. And to make sure when picking classes for next year that it's not looking like all of a sudden you're just trying to take easy classes. And we would always encourage people, if you do know a major you have in mind, look at what the college websites say as far as if they may sometimes have specific classes they require if you're applying for a particular major. But that's something you find just by looking at individual college websites. Yes?
How do you figure out the total cost for a college? Like sometimes it's like tuition, room and board, but like a whole bunch of numbers, and then
yes, so the total cost for a college, that's a whole other conversation, to be honest. That is something I do get into in my student groups, but the biggest thing to understand that's important is the way financial aid works. So I would recommend, there's also a financial aid night that will be happening later this year, because if you just look on SCORE or look on a college website at what they call the sticker price for a college, honestly, very few people pay that full price. But it depends what type of college you're applying to. You know, what % of financial need do they generally need? Or do they give out the scholarships to people with high grades, or do they give their money just based on income? You know, it's complicated, basically, is the answer. But my advice would be not to assume that what the sticker price you see is what you would pay, but instead to to investigate the financial aid in particular. And I think that that's also, we're going to get a bit into that in this presentation, but I would recommend absolutely also coming to the financial aid night. Yeah, Ms. Smith just mentioned also that I believe it's actually a law now that all the college websites do have what they call a net price calculator somewhere on their website. That is just an estimate, not quite as thorough an estimate as the financial aid resource, but it's at least an estimate where you can put in some general figures of what your income is, and they'll tell you what on average you'd be expecting to pay at that school. Yes, that's a good point. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Leary because I know there's a bunch more to cover, but I appreciate your questions.
That's fine. Hi, everyone. So this ties into Ms. Minty's last slide. Just to make you all aware that course selections are coming up after the break, our whole process for course selections. And we just want you to be aware of the timeline, really, and maybe have conversations with your students. So their portal is going to close on March 18th, so they will need to have all of their selections in there by March 18th. But as you can see, it is a process. We're meeting with them at grade level by counselor, and then they're talking to their teachers in the meantime. And just know that if students disagree with a recommendation from a teacher, they need to be talking to that teacher and having a more in-depth conversation and advocating for themselves, really, especially, you know, as we're getting into 17 and 18-year-olds, if they're wanting to take honors versus CP or wanting to take AP level classes, to advocate for themselves with that teacher. And they cannot override into an AP course. They do need teacher permission. And just to make sure that into senior year, as Ms. Minty said, take challenging courses, and obviously that looks different for every student. Take challenging courses in which they can succeed in, and looking at the overall balance. And it ties into what Ms. Minty said too. For example, our graduation requirements align very much with Massachusetts state schools and their requirements. But if you dive deeper into your research, and if a student is looking at a UC school out in California, I've had rising seniors come into me over the summer and say, I just discovered I need a visual or performing arts class for a UC school. I need to switch my senior year schedule. So it does very much tie into all of their research that they're doing right now. And additional opportunities for juniors and seniors are our virtual courses. We've been doing this for several years now, BHS or Edgenuity, offering classes through them during the school day. And students may only take courses that BHS does not offer. So this is a great option for students who unexpectedly over the summer wind up with schedule conflicts or things like that, or maybe want to just take a course that we don't offer. It does not get factored into GPA, but it does get added to their transcript. And for several years now, we've been offering several courses that have college credit or dual enrollment options. As you can see, some of these courses are AP, but not all of them are AP. So there is, for any of those AP options, you do have the AP option or the dual enrollment option. And that's all outlined in our program of studies, which will be available throughout the course selection process and throughout the summer. So jumping into state university admissions for Massachusetts, pre-COVID, students with a GPA below a 3.0 had to meet a minimum requirement on a sliding scale for SATs or ACTs. And we'll show you that in a second. But the current policy, honestly, this is so fluid. We have to keep changing and updating the information that we're providing to students. You all may have heard that Dartmouth College in New Hampshire recently changed. They're going back to now requiring SATs. And so we may see that pattern. And I'm not saying this applies to the state schools in Massachusetts, but just know that these these policies can still be changing between now and the summer and next fall. And it's really important that throughout the research that juniors are doing is to really read the fine print and make sure they're updated on whatever colleges they apply to, what their test policies are. The higher ed website is a great resource for staying up to date in terms of Massachusetts schools. This is the sliding scale that, as we said, was in place pre-COVID. And so we do still show it because it can be a good guide if students are taking the SATs, and we still are encouraging it, to whether or not to submit. It can be a good guide for, should I submit my scores or not? So as we said, below a 3.0, you can see the lower the GPA is, the higher the SATs or ACTs needed to be. And this did not guarantee admission pre-COVID. It still was for them to be considered for admission, but it's just a good gauge of what was required. Some of you may have heard of the Mass Transfer A2B program, and what the A2B stands for is Associates to Bachelors. So with the community colleges in Massachusetts, it's an agreement with our state universities, all of our four-year schools. So students can start out of one of the 15 Mass community colleges. They don't need to select Middlesex just because it's the closest to us. They still have their choice. As you can see, there are a lot of requirements. They have to earn a GPA of 2.5 and transfer into a state college or university, space permitting, with a qualified major. So there are a lot of requirements, and Mass Art and Mass Maritime are separate from this, so they are not necessarily included in this. The most important thing I can tell you about this is if a student is interested in following this path, when they go to their community college, they should let them know immediately that they want to be part of this A2B program, and they will be set up with an advisor who will guide them through this process and help them choose all the appropriate classes. When we meet with the students, we let them know there's a number of reasons people choose community colleges. It might be that their GPA wasn't high enough to get into the four-year school they wanted to, or it might mean they want to save money. College is expensive. Maybe they want to do 2 years at a community college, transfer to a state school, and get their bachelor's at a lower cost overall. Or maybe the career they're looking at requires an associate's degree, so they can do 2 years and go right into the workforce. So there's a number of reasons for this pathway. Really, this is just an overview of the next several slides. Students often say, well, what are the factors in the admissions process? And here they are. We are going to break each one of these down each one of these pieces down in the next several slides. So the transcript is the most important piece always in the college application process. It's the most important factor. And what our transcript looks like, it's a one-sided sheet of paper, and we're breaking it down for you in sections. So this is the top, where you can see the student and their GPA through the end of junior year will be listed. Their weighted GPA from BHS will be listed in the top right. The center holds all the weight. So as you can see, there's a different square for each grade level, 9, 10, 11, and 12. What you will notice here is 9, 10, and 11 is all consistent. You're seeing the classes the student took, the level, the final grade only, so no quarterly grades, the credit that was earned for each class, and as long as they pass, they earn the credit. Grade 12 is always going to be different depending on when the student applies. So until first quarter grades come out, which is typically around November 15th at BHS, sometimes the 13th, 14th, they will only see the senior classes that have been selected and the level of those classes. And then November 15th and beyond, they will start to see quarterly grades. And we will provide updates.
Yeah. Advisory won't be on the transcript.
Oh, advisory will not be on the transcripts. Or homeroom. Mr. Adebato just wants to add that. Yeah, that's a fluke right here. And then this is just the bottom that provides colleges with a little key to let them know what everything means. And our school profile, really this is a document that the district creates, that the high school creates every single year. It's updated to reflect how we do things at BHS. So, and it's just a double-sided document regarding our curriculum, our graduation requirements, how we calculate GPA, how many students are in the senior class, what the average GPA is, what the highest GPA is, what the average test scores are, all things like that, so that when colleges are comparing students across the country, they have some background information about the high school and how we run things here. And now, Mrs. Smith. Ah, questions? Yeah.
So the previous slide where the graph you showed, it does not have the date 12, and sometimes the ED dates are November 1st. So is that fine?
So what we do is we send the transcript we have with no senior grades, just the classes. So the example that you saw, we send that for the November 1st deadline. And then as soon as our first quarter grades become available, we send an updated transcript to those schools, which is right around the middle of November.
And you just send one time, not every time they
We do a mid-year update as well. For school, especially if students haven't heard from a school, but we typically do just a mid-year update, because even if a student has been accepted, a college wants to know that the student is maintaining the grades that they were accepted with.
sorry, I have another.
One more question?
Yes. So this information school profile, does it only come for the current year, or it just
For the current year, we update it every year, so we have an updated document every September. Yeah. Jackson.
And some of it's based on previous years, like what percentage of last year's seniors are going to 4-year schools and 2-year schools. But it will say what the highest GPA is of your students.
Yes.
Two questions. When can you get the transcript? And number two, the GPA that I saw was on a scale of 1 to 5. Do colleges also go 1 to 5, or do they go 1 to 4?
Great question. So the first question is how can you personally get a transcript?
Yeah.
So students in senior year, we do have a process within the counseling department where students can request a copy of their transcript from our registrar just by filling out a document within our office. But in terms of sending them to colleges, that is all done through the student and the counselor, and then through SCORE electronically.
But a student can request a transcript whenever they want.
Yes.
Right. Which you may need for for your insurance, for your car insurance, things like that. You can request it anytime.
And I'm sorry, what was the follow-up
The
question?
question was on the GPA. You give weighted GPAs on the transcript, is that correct?
So BHS has a weighted 4.0.
Oh, I thought I saw 5.0. Okay, that's fine.
So it's a 5.0 is unachievable at our school, but it's considered a weighted 4.0.
It's a 5.0 scale, which makes it a little confusing, but it's a weighted 4.0.
Okay. Thank you.
And colleges understand that.
Yes, they do.
Okay. I'm just wondering how do I understand it?
Right, and honestly, when you look at national data and try to figure out a BHS student's GPA and compare it to national data, it is tricky because it's mostly based off of 4.0, and that's why the scattergrams are so helpful, because then students can see how they stack up against BHS students specifically, and with similar GPA.
So do you understand how the weighted GPA works? Do you know how that works? Anyone want me to explain it? Yes? Okay. So how that works, I understand. How that works is an A is a 4, B is a 3, C is a 2, D is a 1. That's standard college prep. If you take an honors class, it will say B on your transcript, but if it's an honors class, that 3 gets an extra bonus 0.5. in figuring out your grade point average. If it's an AP class, it's an extra full point. So we use the formula that the state schools use in Massachusetts in figuring out their grade point average. So that's how it is. So since freshmen can't take AP classes, since sophomores can only take one, it's just not feasible. That's why 5.0 is not feasible. Does that make sense? And as you noticed, we don't rank, which is very beneficial for your students, because honestly, there's so little difference between certain parts of GPAs. It makes it beneficial for everyone. Okay? Got it? Okay. Okay, so we keep talking about this whole sliding scale that used to exist with the GPA and the testing and the SAT. Let me just take a step back and actually explain what the SAT and the ACTs are. So these are standardized tests that some schools use for college. And when COVID kicked in, almost everybody went to test optional, meaning if you submit them, they'll look at them. If you don't, they'll look at other things in your application. And many people there are two different kinds of tests. I'll explain the difference in just a minute. Most schools have continued that test optional practice because people who don't test well applied to them in greater numbers, so it was great to get all those hefty application fees, but also they found that the caliber of the students they got were often better for different reasons also. So many schools have stayed test optional. The vast majority have stayed test optional, but you should be aware that not everyone does. So that's why when we keep saying, go to the individual college websites, you really need to do that, because we just can't keep track of all the changes. We found out in September certain changes that Massachusetts state colleges wanted for this year, and it just continues to change. We just can't keep track of that. So that's one responsibility of families. Other schools may say test blind. Test blind means they're not even looking at your test scores even if you share them. For the full list of schools who are test optional, there's a website, fairtest.org. Okay. When I say most schools are in the area are test optional, I think we know of like 3 who now require them somewhat in the area. We know MIT, Georgetown, and Dartmouth. Other than that, most are test optional. Now, look at the website, because sometimes different programs may require them. More competitive ones may require them. Nursing might require them for certain schools in certain places. This is why you have to dig in the minutia of all that.
So is that information available in SCORE, test optional, or is that like?
That's available on the college's website, or you can look at the list on fairtest.org, because that's their mission. They're not fans of standardized testing. Okay. I will say that there are many public schools. Sometimes the bigger southern schools will require them because it makes admissions jobs easier. They don't want any recommendations. They want nothing. All they want is grade point average in test scores. So just keep in mind, the bottom line, look at the individual college websites. SAT, we give a practice one in 10th grade and an optional one in 11th grade in October. So this past October was the first year that we had the digital version offered. So those of you whose juniors took it this past October, your scores should have come out. You should have your scores. You should be able to access your scores, so you can get a ballpark of potentially what you may look like getting on the real one. And again, look at the college websites. Okay. I'm not going to go through this completely. I'm just going to hit the highlights. The difference between the two, we give the SAT here. Honestly, a lot of it is East Coast, West Coast, or East Coast, Midwest. A lot of the Midwest does the ACT. Oh, I thought that was me. And the SAT tends to be more of an East Coast thing. The difference is SAT is now only digital, ACT is in paper. SAT has two parts, math and combined reading and writing. ACT has 4 sections. And so on the SAT, there's 2 sections, you get your scores, they're added together, and that's your total. ACT has 4 sections, math, science, and it's not like, tell me all the details about mitochondria. It's reading charts and graphs, and can you interpret and extrapolate based on charts and graphs. So that's science. And then reading is about the same, comprehension, and then writing, more sentence verb, subject verb, agreement, things like that. What you should know is the big thing on the new SAT is they have adaptive testing. Everybody's test is not the same. There's module 1 that everybody takes, goes from easy to hard, and then module 2 will depend on how you did on module 1. You could be tracked into the hard module 2 or the easier version. And there's still going to be easier questions on the hard one and harder questions on the easier one, but it's weighted differently, because the thing to know is on the harder, you can still get that maximum of 800 per section, but if you get tracked to the easier version, we are hearing, and again, that we haven't, the first time of the testing is going to be this March. So, but we are hearing the max is like 620, 630 per section if you get tracked to the easier version. So my point is, module 1, you need to really put some time into that. Make sure you don't skip anything, okay? That's pretty much the highlights of that, okay?
Did you want to, is that ACT doing?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Online,
ACT.
Different site.
Pardon me?
ACT, aren't they offering online at different sites as like a pilot?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I will say on the ACT, you get the most is 36 per section, and it's averaged together. So that's the difference. Colleges typically super score, which means if I take either ACT or SAT, if I do better in one section in one test date, better in another section, another test date, they combine, they super score my top scores. Okay? Yes?
Is the college to decide which type of test?
Most colleges do not care. I think I heard of one school in the Midwest in Utah who cared and wanted the ACT, but I haven't heard, I don't think any of us have heard ever that colleges don't care. And there's concordance tables where you can take both, and you can say, let's see which one my student likes better, and compare how this SAT score compares against the ACT, and then if you want to retake it, take the one you did better on.
Okay, so that was my question. Is the student that decide which test?
Yes, student decides which one they want, yes. ACT isn't given at Burlington, but it's given nearby, so it's easy. Yes?
When the child takes SAT and gets their results back, does it show whether it went to the harder or the easier track?
I don't believe it does. My understanding is you don't know. So we're all kind of trying to figure out what the implications of this are also. The students liked the digital version. I would have hated it for myself, but they seem to have liked it, and it was shorter, but we're all still kind of learning as we go with this one also. Okay. Any other questions about that? Okay. So timing, register for SAT or ACT on their website. Again, if your child hates testing, fairtest.org has lots that do not take testing or test optional. You should finish the testing by January of senior year. Down a little bit, in a little bit, I'm going to talk about the deadlines for college and the different ways you can apply. But for the most part, testing should be done by January of senior year to make some of the latest regular deadlines. We have fee waivers for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. If that is you, please make sure you see your counselor, because that also, if you get a fee waiver for the testing, you also get application fee waivers. Applications are going to cost between $50 and $75 each. It adds up. Okay. Test prep. There was a January letter that got mailed home, but also if they're giving a discounted rate for Burlington residents, so just email Mr. Adebato if you want that code. If English is not your first language, or you haven't been in the country for however many years, or your child hasn't been in the country for however many, a certain number of years, colleges may want them to do English testing. Everybody's got their own policies. Some say if you graduated and took regular English in high school, you're fine. Others want you to take extra testing, so just be aware. When to send your scores, typically what's going to happen is you're going to talk to your counselor probably about each one and make a plan for each college you apply to. But in general, only send your scores if they're above average. Colleges tell us they cannot unsee whatever you share with them. Okay? Another thing, so we've talked about grades and transcripts. We've talked about testing, potentially. Another thing that is going to be required by most, but not all colleges, is recommendations. So do's and don'ts. Do meet with counselors often and do our questionnaire. Typically, it's due by the first day of school of senior year, because we need time to write these letters. Do ask recent teachers in major subjects. When we talk about the deadlines, some early deadlines are in November. So obviously you can ask junior teachers. Senior teachers are going to depend if you've had them before, because they won't have had you very long for senior year. So in that case, you might look at sophomore year if they felt like they knew you well. Ask people face-to-face. Let's be considerate and a little more professional. At least a month's notice, share deadlines. Every teacher has their own requirements of what they want you to do for their letter. So when you ask them face-to-face, your student is going to need to ask, is there anything you need me to do? What do you need for me for your letter? In terms of considering asking people who know you outside of school, that is not like, oh, I have a friends, co-workers, whoever graduated from Harvard, can they write me a letter? Colleges don't want you to do that. What this means is, do you have a boss, a coach, something like that? However, at the same time, on the don't side says, don't assume a coach or an advisor's letter is going to substitute for academics. They're going to almost always want at least one academic letter, and the more competitive the college, the more likely they're going to want 2 academic letters from major subjects, potentially a third. But do not get too many letters. It's just inconsiderate to the teachers who have to write these letters. They're time consuming, and teachers really try to write good letters, so it's just rude to ask for too many letters that you're not going to use, and don't expect to be able to read the letters. The expectation is, if you're asking someone for a letter recommendation, the expectation is, if they don't think they can write you a good one, then they will tell you. And so don't expect to see them until later on senior year. And don't assume the best letter comes from the class you got an A+ in. To be honest, some of the best letters I've seen have been from students who really worked very hard in chemistry, because you're showing work ethic. At some point down the road, your child's going to hit a speed bump, and it's good to show how they work through those tough times. So consider that when they're thinking about who to ask for letters from. And don't forget to say thank you. In life. Okay. Another thing is, so there's the concrete stuff, test scores, grade point average, and then so there's the soft stuff, like letters of recommendation. How do they get to know who you are? It's all about fit. You are trying to figure out if a college is a good fit for you. They're trying to figure out if you're a good fit for them. So one way that you can show that is in the essay. Part of that, there's going to be several different kinds of essays. Some will just be a general essay that you can use for a lot of colleges. The more competitive schools are going to have perhaps a couple essays that you have to write. Start brainstorming this year. The English department every single year has certain essays that they have students write. You can reflect back on those when you're trying to consider what to write. And from our understanding, in the spring of junior year, English teachers will help them write something that they could potentially use for college. Okay. But if they still need help, the English department has said next year there's a new half-year class called Expository Writing 2 that will work on things like that. And the National English Honor Society is having an college essay day in the spring where college representatives can come and talk about what they like and what they see and what they recommend. Also, over the summer, there's going to be a boot camp where that's one thing they can do is work with an English teacher on their essay. Yes?
I remember a few years ago, it used to be that all English classes, whether they were AP or CP, whatever, everybody worked on their college essays the first assignment in the fall.
Of senior year, right.
Senior year, right when they needed it.
The English department has decided to change that and make that
policy.
And in many ways we do too, but this is the first time they're going to be doing that also. So, but I like the fact that it gets one more thing done. So I hear what you're saying. Yes, and also I think that's also in a reaction to the fact that many deadlines are earlier. So for a lot of reasons it makes it better for everybody all the way around. But there's a lot of support. We have a writing center, we have English teachers, last year's, this year's, who can help your student with their essay. Okay, I'm just sharing this slide because the English department asked us to tell you what kinds of things that they do each year. Okay, we can move on. You don't want me to read all that anyway. Okay, another thing is activity list. What is your child passionate about? Where do they spend their time? What are they interested in? And outside, I mean, we can see what they've done in school, in classes. What are the other things? No one wants to go to school with a bunch of duds. So how do you, who only stay in their room and only study, how do you show that you're going to actively engage in the college life? And this is in colleges, look at what you've done in high school and assume that that will also translate into your engagement in your college environment. So activities list is a compilation of the stuff you've done in school, out of school, in high school. Yes, your child may have won an amazing award in middle school. Colleges don't necessarily care. I'm sorry. They really just want to know in high school, more recently, what are your accomplishments? There should be a copy in the packet, but counselors also will have examples on their classroom. And I believe all of us in our small group meetings will also be working on that. Incidentally, all the counselors have had meetings, group meetings already with all of our juniors. If your child has not met with us, they're not checking their emails, or they're not showing up, manage your time. I'm not pointing fingers, just saying. Okay, spring deadline, we really want everyone to get the first draft of their activities done in junior year in the spring. We're trying to make, if you can follow our deadlines, we're going to make you less crazy when the fall comes. Trust us, it's going to be crazy. It's going to be busy. Whatever you do this year, you're not locked in forever. You can keep updating it. So, but we do want you to at least have a rough draft for that. And you're going to need it anyway. Sometimes you can upload it to your application, but you're always, for some of the scholarships that Mr. Adebayo is going to talk about later, it's required that you have an activities list that you have to include. Okay, speaking of applications, how do you get to them? How do you find out what's required? Common App is one application that lots of colleges take. This is where you can find the essay prompts. And you can, when you enter the colleges you're interested in, you can see if they're going to have extra essays, the supplemental essays they're called. If colleges are not using the Common App, you'll find their application on their websites. Okay, deadlines. Let's talk about timeline. Regular decision is the regular deadline, usually January 1st to March. Some have rolling, which is on the bottom. Rolling, that means they decide as they go along. Typically with regular, they might wait to see what kind of pool they get and make their decisions. Now, the challenge with regular deadlines is you apply January to March, but you may not find out until March and April. Well, let's skip forward a year. What's happening in April? Well, in April, some students may be going on internship and may or may not be in the building, and they're going to have other things going on, so they may not want to wait that long to find out if they've gotten into a college. So many students want to take advantage of the early options. Those deadlines are more like November 1st to December 15th or so. Now, be aware that some southern schools have October 15th deadlines, so keep in mind if you're looking outside this area. Here's the difference. Early action, you're just taking action early. You're applying early, you're finding out early if you got in, which means like December-ish to UMass Amherst just released their acceptances not too long ago. Why did it take so long? Well, they're still test optional, so that takes a lot longer to process. But it's nice to know a little bit earlier, at least from somewhere, so at least you know you have a home, okay? But you still need to be competitive. If your grades weren't strong, you might want to hold off to the regular to show colleges that you've pulled your grades up, you're in a good place, you're ready for college. Okay. Early decision, this is getting to be a bigger and bigger issue because what early decision is, you are deciding early. You can only apply to one school early decision. You are telling them that if they accept you, you will go there. I sign something, you sign something, the student signs something agreeing to that if they get accepted, they'll withdraw their applications from the other schools. Why is this a big deal? Well, from a college's perspective, you're a sure thing, right? So if they only want a certain number of students, whoever they take from early decision is a sure thing. So they already know who is going to their school. If you apply early action or regular, you don't have to let colleges know you're going there till May 1st. Colleges, it's reassuring for them to use early decision, right? The challenge is, there are some schools who, well, if you're looking at a REACH school, there are some schools who take an enormous number of students from that early decision pool. Some schools, out of the whole pool of applicants, 30 to almost 40% of their students, Northeastern, BU, Boston College, are examples of some schools who take giant percentages from that early decision pool. So it can be a great strategy if you have one school. However, financial aid, right? Now your financial aid is pretty much going to be the same thing regardless of when you apply, whether you apply early decision or regular early action. However, remember how we talked a while back about safety schools and realistic schools and all that? You might get into Northeastern, for example, and you applied their early decision, but they're a school who only does, they only do need-based. What does need-based financial aid mean? You've got to have need. So you might end up with a $70,000 ticket if they don't think that you need as much money. Whereas if you apply to a school where you are a really good looking applicant, they might give you merit aid because they want you to attend their school. So that's a really challenging decision you have to make as a family. So do your research, look at that calculator that Ms. Mintry mentioned in terms of making the decision that's right for your family. Talk to the financial aid people and say, we really want to know what we're getting ourselves into if we make that decision. Okay? Just to review end of the year tasks, create the list of potential colleges, visit schools. What feels right? What's the vibe? What's the vibe on campus? Make sure that list is on SCORE. Create the draft activity list. Ask counselor and teachers for letters of recommendation, usually after April vacation. And we will be working with students to help them create a common app account and get a sense for what kinds of stuff go into an application. Okay? I've given you a lot of information. Any questions? Okay. Next, Ms. Potasek.
Is that good? Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Let's take a deep breath. I know it's a lot of information, but all this information is definitely on our website. We have a lot of resources for you. We're along with the ride with you, okay? So we're together in this. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can help. This is a family decision. The students do need you. But I think there's some information to help you think about how do you want to undertake this journey. So you do definitely want to encourage your teen to drive the bus. They have to take the lead, right? They're going off next year. You want to make sure they practice those skills now. So hopefully they're coming to see their counselor. They're asking us questions. We are flexible. You know, we talked a little bit about those smaller group meetings. Then we'll have individual meetings. We can do appointments before school, after school, during flex. So we would definitely are available to them. We do want to discuss restrictions up front. So we have this wonderful platform called SCORE, and then they can search all over the country and actually all over the world. And you'll have students that are thinking about applying to school in England, but unfortunately some family members are not okay with that. This is a family decision, so you do want to talk about the restrictions up front. If abroad is not an option, if going to the West Coast is not an option, please let them know that up front. So they are going to need you to help them with reminders, but I think it's important for you to think about this. We're talking about this now, and imagine as from now until the time they choose a school, it's going to be part of the conversations everywhere they go, every day. It is a stressful process. That is normal, but it's the reality. So it's a good system to think about 1 day a week that you pick, whatever works for your family. Maybe it's a Sunday morning after you have breakfast, and that's your time to check in. What happened throughout the week? What tasks did you complete? What tasks are ahead for the week ahead? Right? So I think they do need your guidance, they do need your support, but that constant, what did you do today, what's going on, is a lot, right? Because we're talking about this regularly senior year. So I think one thing Ms. Minty talked about this earlier is don't limit your options up front regarding the sticker price. I think one thing that we've learned along the process, state schools and private schools have different funding sources, different abilities to provide merit scholarships and aid. So if you kind of put a wide net, a combination of private and public schools, you take a look at your offers, you make your decision as a family, and you don't have to finalize things until May 1st. Okay, students, and actually any questions on that piece? So everybody's thinking about the day that they're going to pick during the week. Students in need of support services. So students that have a documented disability, might be on an IEP or a 504, or have testing, are eligible for services in any college setting. Each college does things a little bit differently. I have folks that ask me, is an automatic all accommodations that we get in high school, is that exactly the same in college? It is not. It is also something that your student is going to be kind of taking the lead on. All schools have math support, writing support, but there's additional services for students that have documented disabilities, and that's definitely a conversation they can have with their counselor. But as you do college visits, it's a nice thing to, if you go to the Disability Support Services office, check in with them, ask them, but they're going to want to talk to your student. So if that is something that they're going to look to pursue, make sure that they're able to kind of verbalize what their needs might be, so to practice that. For those athletes out there that might be thinking about playing a sport in college, if this is really for the NCAA clearinghouse, it's really for Division I and Division II athletes, and it's a very specific process. We have the link on there, and I think all these are, you know, live links, so once we share the presentations, you can click on them, but it's definitely something you should be thinking about now if you're thinking about Division I and II sports. Our courses are aligned with the NCAA clearinghouse, and you will be having to do a process. Our school registrar puts in your transcript and information, but you have to get that going sooner rather than later if you're thinking of those two divisions. It's not necessary for a Division III athlete. What is a gap year? And actually I made a correction, but if you go back to that one. So in our Burlington Public Schools website, if you go to the counseling department and...
Oh, where are we going now?
Oh, go to the next one. Any questions for athletes out there? I should ask first. No? Okay. So what is a gap year? Have you folks heard of a gap year? Yeah, it's becoming more and more popular, right? And I think it's there's so many resources out there. It is a time that you take intentionally after high school. We do encourage all students to apply to a post-secondary option, be it 2-year for college or a 4-year college. And then if you decide to take a gap year, you can take that deferment and take that and go to college the following year. All right, but I did want to show you all, if you go to our Burlington Public Schools counseling website and you go to the college options, we have a list of really incredible gap year options. It's a wonderful resource, so hopefully you've checked it out. But it's something that students are really looking to. It could be credit-based, it could be international, it could be local. So there's some great options out there. I think I'm good. Okay. Any questions?
I have
Yes.
2 questions.
2 questions.
The first question is for junior students that are finishing coming summer. Is there any program like federal program that would enable them to internship or some type of getting a job close to what they would like to do at college?
Are you, I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. Are you thinking about between junior year and senior year? So there is definitely enrichment opportunities. Internships, it depends, but we actually, on our website, we have some resources, and actually if it's very focused, if you're thinking of STEM opportunities or art opportunities, we definitely have some resources. I'd have your student check with their counselor. I would definitely have them do that sooner rather than later, because a lot of the applications for enrichment programs or internships for the summer are starting now. Oh, we just had the career day, so hopefully your student attended. Did they share any information with you about it?
Yeah.
Good.
And the other question was related to financial aid based on federal programs. So there is some type of an office that allows to basically register a student and see if they can access the federal program for financial aid for colleges.
You were thinking about FAFSA?
Yes.
And financial aid. So Mr. Arbat is actually going to be covering that for you. Okay. All right.
Good segue.
Thank you. All right, so this is the final part of tonight. And we're going to talk a little bit about financial aid. It's not a financial aid night. We do discuss financial aid more about the types of forms that parents and students would be responsible for. We do work with, We do work with MIFA, the Massachusetts Educational Financial Authority. There'll be a slide. Can you just go back one, Gloria, real quick? I just want to make sure Thursday, June 6th is when we would have our financial aid night here. But you'll hear me talk about MIFA. Counselors, you hear them talk about MIFA. We have a link to them on our website. You can certainly Google them. They're a nonprofit agency that helps families with the financial aid process. They have several different webinars that are short, that can answer some questions about financial aid forms and things like that. So I would encourage you to remember that resource, MIFA. Yes?
Is there a particular time?
I think on the last slide it's going to say the time as well. 6:30. 6 o'clock, I think.
6 o'clock.
Yeah. But I think that's actually on the last slide too, but good point. If we go to the next slide. So with financial aid, you got to keep in mind the funding for financial aid comes from different sources. And the form that I'll talk about next slide, the FAFSA form, that money primarily will come from federal and state monies. So by filling out the FAFSA form and going through that process, you're essentially applying to see what kind of financial aid you can get as a result of the information you provide them. So that funding source comes from the state and federal government. Another source where funding can come from for financial aid is through the individual colleges and universities. So students are applying to obviously a variety of colleges and universities. You heard a little bit about merit aid. Oftentimes that merit aid could come from that college. If they really would like a student to attend, they would entice students with some merit aid potentially. And oftentimes that's coming from what they would call institutional funds. So the FAFSA form, this is a federal form. How many have filled it out in past years? Okay, so it's completely changed. Not completely, but it has changed quite a bit. It's still, the process is still similar in terms of you have to go to the website, create an account, but the application has changed a little bit. And our financial aid night that we just had with seniors, it was discussed. It hadn't been released at that point. It's now been released, and our current seniors are working on this now, and their families are working on it now. But the federal financial aid form, it's the most common financial aid form. It does not cost money to complete. And it says October here. Probably next year would be opening in October. It coincides with your taxes, so it can pull the information in when you fill it out. When you set up your account, it will pull information in automatically for you. And again, when we talk about financial aid, it's not just, there are scholarship opportunities, merit scholarship potentially. There's also subsidized and unsubsidized loans. There's work study. So that financial aid form allows you to qualify for fund from federal and state funding from a variety of ways. So that's the FAFSA form. The CSS profile. This is a different, did you have a question? No. I thought you raised your hand, sorry.
I was going to ask.
Yes.
What does that do?
So the due date, it varies based on the college. So the colleges actually have it, but primarily counselors, we usually tell parents and students right in the tax.
November 1st for an early college, each college.
Depends on the college of the college your son or daughter's applying to, whatever the deadline is there. For example, you heard about early action, early decision. If you want to try to get a financial aid package idea, you would want to have that submitted by that deadline.
Do you need to apply or file a form for each college you want to apply, or is just form for multiple colleges?
One form for multiple colleges.
Okay. And then the college will be registering your application, and from that on, with your form, they will know from which school you are coming, high school you are coming, and if it is approved by the federal government, they will get the fund directly from the government to the school.
Yes, essentially there's a connection that's made, and it's all looked at together. Yes. The CSS profile, that is another financial aid form that you actually pay for every school that you would use it for, you would pay per school. The cost varies. It is also looking at students would qualify for what, as I said earlier, institutional funds. So the CSS profile is designed for students to try to get any kind of institutional funds at a particular college or university. This is a completely different form that asks a lot more questions than the FAFSA form does. And again, the idea of this form would be to qualify for institutional funds. It's mostly private schools, if not all private schools, that would ask you to complete this. And again, if you're looking in terms of a deadline, I would really encourage you to align the completion of these forms as best you can with the application deadline. Some colleges' early decision may require you to complete that CSS profile if they're a private school. And then some schools may have their own form that you would probably get either through the application process, or they may send you something after you complete an application. All right, so there's different processes in place to qualify for federal and state aid and then institutional funds. And we have a link there, as Mrs. Votazik said. These are live links when we share the presentation. You can check out the MIFA Institute, again, part of MIFA, but they offer a variety of, usually they're like 45 minutes to an hour on all different types of financial aid related topics.
And they offer support in different languages too.
And they offer support in a multitude of languages. So again, I mentioned this earlier, but when you fill out these financial aid forms, you've seen whether or not you qualify for scholarships, grants. Those are the ones you want, because that's the money you don't have to pay back. Loans, they have different types of loans that you could potentially qualify for, either subsidized or unsubsidized. And so sometimes you don't have to pay the interest, just the principal. You can also wait until after your 4 years of college to start paying the bill. All right, so there's different options that you qualify for as a result of the type of loan you may qualify for. And then there's work study. That's actually taken into account with financial aid. Work study means a student would work on the campus. They would have a job set up for them. Keep in mind, a student doing the work study, they would actually get a check. You know, they would get the check, that your son or daughter, but they still, even though that may or may not go to the tuition, they still would factor that in as part of financial aid. So again, that was the financial aid forms. If you can just remember those two names, FAFSA, CSS profile, you can certainly start to do your research now to check out those applications. Scholarships. When we talk about scholarships here, we're talking about the local scholarship program, the Burlington Community Scholarship Foundation. Several donors come together and they donate a significant amount of scholarship money to Burlington High School graduates. And last year it was about $365,000. And we can tell you that goes to Burlington High School graduating students. It's an amazing event, because what happens is a lot of people within the community come together to grant scholarships. And there's, again, it's a multitude of agencies and organizations. It's not like one person deciding on all these scholarships, so keep that in mind. It is a multitude of agencies. So all the local youth sport programs provide scholarships. Some businesses in town provide scholarships. Civic and fraternal organizations. And then we have quite a few memorial scholarships, which really is, obviously, that's a very rewarding scholarship to get, because what happens there is there are families that have, mother, father, brother, sister, a child that has passed away, and they're still allowing those students to live on through a scholarship. So we add all that up, and it was $365,000. That translated to about 165 kids of the graduating class last year. So the way that's publicized to students is right around March 1st of senior year. That's when we really start to publicize this. A couple of weeks, we're going to be meeting with seniors right here in the auditorium to talk about the local scholarship programs. And that would be something where parents can certainly help, timelines, things like that. You want to make sure you're staying up to speed on what those deadlines are. We do start to publicize scholarships right off the bat in the fall. through SCORE, we have a link to a document that lists a variety of scholarships. Right now, it tends to be mostly national and state scholarships. We find over the years, most of the students are getting the local scholarships as opposed to the state and the national scholarships. Any questions on the local scholarship program?
Can you go back?
Sure.
So what did you mean by applications available?
So scholarships, the local scholarships have applications. So all the organizations, they'll have their own application. And we make those available, like I said, right around March 1st of senior year.
So when they graduate in May, right? Senior year?
Yep.
But then applications available in August.
So that would be the state and local scholarships in August of senior year. So just before the senior year starts. How many have participated or heard of Adopt a Class? I'm sure you all have. So Adopt a Class is a scholarship program in town that it's just one of the many programs, but they adopt a class. So a business, for example, I think King's had a class. They work with a class from kindergarten through grade 12. And they do fundraisers with King's along the way. And they're raising money towards their class fund. And parents from K through 8 are donating, are contributing time to volunteer. That's tracked and documented. Then when students get to 9th grade, it's up to the student to continue that volunteer work. Grade 12 comes, you complete the application, they'll look at all the hours you donated, the time you've contributed, and they do a calculation and the student gets a scholarship. All right, and if you weren't in Burlington, kindergarten through 8, or you're new to Burlington, you still have the option to participate. You just stop by the counseling office, your son or daughter, and they can see Mrs. Kavanaugh. She coordinates the program. She's one of the secretaries in the office. And so that could still be an option for new students as well.
Excuse me, what is the criteria to being successfully accepted on one of these private scholarship? After you submit the form and you apply your data, I imagine that just a general data about the student and maybe their family and maybe their family.
It varies. They're different depending on the scholarship. Some may want some information about financial need. Some may be the highest GPA. Some may be you're majoring in education. They're all different. And then we just ask you to use caution. Yes, you could use an agency. That's totally up to you. You pay them money, and then they do the research for you. We have found over the years that doesn't always work out in terms of that agency finding you scholarships. So I would just, again, do your research and use caution. And very quickly, I'll talk about the MCAS. There's 2 MCAS tuition waivers, and it's only to Mass public colleges and universities. So the MCAS test scores, if students hit the appropriate scores, they can then qualify for what would be a tuition waiver at any of the Mass public colleges and universities. And the John and Abigail Adams, if a student were to qualify, they would find out in senior year. You would get a letter that says you're in the top 25% of MCAS scores within your school, not the state, just within the school. Student qualifies, they get a letter. You take that letter. If you're going to a state school only, not private schools, your tuition would be waived. Now that is not a free ride by any means. So we always use UMass Amherst, so my numbers could be a little choppy here, but UMass Amherst is around, room and board and fees is around $28,000 to $30,000. And then the tuition's probably about $1,900. So you'd be waived from the $1,900 per year, not the $30,000, but still it's a savings. The other option for MCAS is another one called the Stanley Koplik Award. That is if you may not necessarily be in the top 25%, but you did meet the criteria for the Koplik. You could potentially also get a tuition waiver this way. With the Koplik, you just need to hit those minimum threshold scores, and then you need to do 2 additional things in order to then qualify for the tuition waiver. So the Adams, easier, just top 25%, you get a letter. Coplic, you got to meet this threshold first, then do 2 additional things. Those 2 additional things could be AP testing, they could be a dual enrollment course, they could be a community service project. There's a variety of things that students could discuss with their counselor to figure out, but we just want you to know there are 2 awards. The timing is not good because you find out about the Coplic first, the one that takes the extra steps. We're going to be finding out Coplic awards next week sometime. You don't find out about the Adams Award until the fall of senior year. And with the Coplic, you could wait to fill any applications out if you want. You could wait until you see whether or not you qualify for the Adams. So again, I'm more than happy to answer any questions on that. It gets a little bit confusing. Oh, here are the other awards. So AP exam, Outstanding Achievement, Family Community Leadership, Mass Seal of Biliteracy, dual enrollment course. So there's different options, but you would need to do 2 extra things in addition to hitting those threshold scores for the Coplic. And so we just, we know that this process, again, as Mrs. Wojtaszek said, things can be challenging. And we just ask students to, communicate with parents, because sometimes that can be a challenge during this process. As you've heard, they're going to be getting lots of questions from lots of people. So we really encourage you to make sure you set up that model. And we just like to list some of these social emotional readiness skills, just so students are aware as they navigate through this process how important some of these skills are. And counselors, in some cases, we try to work on these skills with students. I know some of the counselors have incorporated into their junior meetings some social emotional processes that can help students kind of manage this. Again, I think with stress and anxiety, stress is okay. You don't hear that too much, but it's okay. It's okay to get stressed. It's okay to be anxious. I think it's just how we kind of compensate and work through that. So we're here to help students get through that process to plan for after high school. So this is a little bit more specific. This has the times. So we do have a breakfast coming up. This kind of lists the upcoming events. So again, you'll get copies of this, but we have the course selection process breakfast, the college fair. We do have a breakfast we'll offer for junior parents just before the summer, and then the financial aid night in June. This was mentioned earlier, but every summer, or not every, so the last 3 years we've done this. It's a college application workshop. And the idea is to allow students before senior year to feel like they have a handle and get a step ahead with the college process. For those students that attend, I think they find it helpful. The attendance is low. We'd like it to be higher than it is. But I think for those students that attend, it is very, very useful. So I would encourage you, if time permitting, for students that are here, I would really consider attending this. And we do have a couple of English teachers that are there as well. They help supplement the program by working on the essay. And then the counselors are here to work with students on all the other things, all these things that you're hearing about tonight. So just a couple of things. We would love for you to complete an evaluation form. You all should have received one. SCORE, you've heard a lot of talk about SCORE. If you want an account as a parent, we would ask you to fill out the SCORE form. Both forms you would submit to us and just leave on the table in the back. With SCORE, you would have the same access as your son or daughter, but we really like parents to have their account and students to have their account on that first step at the independence thing. So I think separate accounts is really an important part. And then you heard a little bit about questionnaires tonight. And so some of the counselors will ask parents to complete a questionnaire. And that would be part of the recommendation process. That questionnaire can allow us to get some insights we may not already have. So expect that at some point you may have to fill out a questionnaire. It probably wouldn't be till next fall. But we like to give parents a heads up about that.